I booked the corner table 3 weeks ahead, ordering the wine my husband saved for special nights at 8:07. His text arrived. Client emergency. Don't wait up. Not a single kind word. 3 seconds later, our card flashed. The Calder Hotel. Suite 1408. 12 minutes later, I watched him exit a private elevator with a strategic investor. My one-sentence reply shattered. Not just our marriage, but his plot to steal my future. I am Victoria Woods. At 41 years old, I am the founder of Woods Civic Advisory, an urban restructuring consulting firm based right here in Nashville, Tennessee. My entire life, my entire empire, is built on a foundation of absolute discipline. I possess a memory that cuts like a razor blade, and I have cultivated a habit of never, ever overlooking the smallest detail. In my line of work, a misplaced comma in a zoning contract or a slight hesitation from a city councilman can cost millions. I notice everything. It is my gift. And as I would soon learn, my curse. My husband, Drew Callahan, is 43. He is the public face of a highly lucrative luxury real estate branding studio. Drew is the kind of man who wears a bespoke suit like it is a second skin. He is elegant, a dangerously smooth talker, and he possesses a rare talent for making everyone in the room believe that he has everything perfectly under control. We have 2 fully grown children. Ren is 22, currently grinding through graduate school for interior design up in Boston. Beck is 20, studying engineering over in Knoxville. With the bedrooms empty and the house quiet, our marriage looked, from the outside, like a fortress of stability, the kind of partnership other couples whispered about with envy at charity galas. For my birthday, I wanted nothing extravagant. I craved simplicity in a world of complex variables. I had arranged for the corner table on the rooftop terrace of the Ash Room. It was a Tuesday, but I had made the reservation 3 weeks in advance to ensure we got that exact spot. I requested the sommelier to pull the exact vintage of Pinot Noir that Drew had praised relentlessly during our trip to Napa 2 years ago. The rules for the evening were silently understood but sacred. No clients, no buzzing phones, no corporate strategy, just the 2 of us, sitting across from each other, existing in the same airspace without an agenda. But the architecture of a betrayal rarely begins at the moment of discovery. It begins with micro-fractures in the foundation. The signals were there from the moment we woke up. As I poured coffee in our sunlit kitchen, Drew was uncharacteristically brief. He offered superficial answers to my questions about his schedule. His eyes kept sliding past mine, fixing on the marble countertop or the window instead of meeting my gaze. When he leaned in to kiss my cheek goodbye, I caught the scent of a new cologne. It was something heavy, laced with cedar and smoke, entirely different from the crisp, citrus scent he had worn for the last decade. And then, the final detail. Before he turned to grab his briefcase, he placed his phone face down on the kitchen island. In 15 years of marriage, Drew had never put his phone face down, not once. At 7:30 in the evening, I was seated at the corner table of the Ash Room. The city lights of Nashville flickered below, a grid of amber and silver. The wine breathed in its crystal decanter. I watched the ice melt in my water glass. The ambient noise of clinking silverware and low chatter felt like a metronome ticking away the minutes. At 8:07, my phone lit up. It was a text from Drew. Client emergency. Do not wait up. I stared at the screen. The glowing pixels felt like ice pressing against my retinas. He told me to go ahead and eat. He told me not to wait. But the thing that sent a glacial chill through my veins was not the abrupt apology. It was the glaring, hollow absence of a simple greeting. He had completely, fundamentally forgotten that today was my birthday. I stayed exactly where I was, letting the cold reality settle over me while my mind began sorting the facts. 3 seconds later, a secondary notification chimed on my screen. It was an alert from our joint premium credit card. My eyes scanned the fresh transaction data. The Calder Hotel, Suite 1408, booked by Landon Pike. The name hit me harder than the location. Landon Pike. He was a ruthless real estate investor who had spent the better part of the last 3 years circling my firm like a vulture. He had repeatedly tried to buy a controlling stake in Wood Civic Advisory, offering inflated valuations and aggressive terms. Every single time, I had flatly rejected him. I knew his reputation. I knew he stripped companies for parts. The idea that my husband's corporate card was being swiped for a luxury suite booked under Landon Pike's name was an equation that simply did not balance. I paid for the untouched wine, left a generous tip, and walked out into the cool night air. I did not drive home to our empty, immaculate house. Instead, I pointed my car toward the business district. The Calder Hotel is an imposing structure of black glass and steel, a monument to new money in the heart of the city. I parked across the street, killing the engine and sinking low into the leather seat of my car. The lobby was a vast, illuminated fishbowl, perfectly visible from my vantage point. I waited. The digital clock on my dashboard flipped from 8:40 to 8:41. Then, the polished brass doors of the private VIP elevator slid open. Drew stepped out. He was not alone. Walking shoulder to shoulder with him was Landon Pike. I watched them move through the lobby. I did not blink. My mind recorded every detail with mechanical precision. Drew was laughing at something Landon said, a soft, relaxed smile that I had not seen directed at me in months. The physical distance between them was entirely wrong for two men dealing with a sudden corporate emergency. There was a relaxed intimacy, a synchronized rhythm to their steps that spoke of deep familiarity. Drew adjusted his suit jacket, and Landon clapped him lightly on the shoulder, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second too long. It was an intimacy closer than anything professional could ever explain. I raised my phone. I stabilized my hand against the steering wheel. I framed the shot perfectly through the windshield, capturing both of their faces clearly in the bright, unforgiving light of the lobby. I pressed the shutter button exactly once. I opened my message thread with Drew. I attached the high-resolution photograph. Beneath it, I typed a single, perfectly calibrated sentence. Say hi to the man in Suite 1408. I hit send. I had no interest in watching the message land or in seeing the exact moment the color left his carefully curated face. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the nighttime traffic of Nashville. As the city lights blurred past my windows, my mind shifted gears, locking into a state of absolute icy clarity. I understood exactly what I was looking at. This was not a simple, messy affair fueled by midlife crisis or fleeting lust. Drew sleeping with Landon Pike was only the surface tension. The smell of the new cologne, the face-down phone, the luxury hotel suite billed to our card, it all pointed to a much darker architecture. This had the distinct, unmistakable stench of a massive betrayal. Landon Pike wanted my company. He had been denied, and now he was walking out of a private elevator with the one man who had the keys to my entire life. They were not just sharing a bed. They were sharing secrets. They were plotting. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather cool against my palms. I did not feel the urge to scream. I felt the slow, deliberate awakening of a general surveying a battlefield. If Drew Callahan thought he could dismantle the empire I built, using the very life we shared as his weapon, he had profoundly miscalculated. He had forgotten the cardinal rule of marrying a woman who builds things for a living. We know exactly where all the load-bearing walls are, and we know exactly how to bring the whole structure crashing down. I sat in the dark at the center island of our kitchen. The ambient light from the street lamp outside cast long, pale shadows across the pristine marble countertops. In front of me sat a small, untouched birthday cake I had picked up that morning, a single, unlit candle resting perfectly in its center. I was still wearing the midnight blue silk dress I had carefully selected for the evening. Its flawless drape felt like a physical weight, a painful reminder of a celebration that never happened. I stayed perfectly still, listening to the silence of the house and waiting for the inevitable sound of the garage door opening. It took him exactly 19 minutes to get home, 19 minutes. A man entangled in a genuine, unexpected client emergency does not abandon his post and rush across the city in 19 minutes simply because his wife sent him a cryptic text message. The sheer speed of his return was the loudest confession he could have possibly made. It stripped away any illusion of professional obligation. He was not managing a crisis. He was the crisis. The heavy oak door connecting the garage to the mudroom clicked open. Drew's footsteps were usually rhythmic and confident, the stride of a man who owned the floor beneath him. Tonight, they were hurried, uneven, carrying the frantic energy of someone trying to outrun a fast-moving fire. He stepped into the kitchen and stopped dead when he saw me sitting in the gloom. He reached for the dimmer switch, flooding the room with a sudden, harsh light that made me narrow my eyes. "Victoria," he breathed out, his chest heaving slightly under his tailored shirt. "Listen to me." I offered him nothing except silence, and I let it stretch until the air between us felt suffocating. He launched into his performance, opening with the standard, rehearsed playbook. I know how it looked. But you have to understand, Landon and I were just discussing a potential project. It was a completely impromptu meeting. He needed to talk in private, away from the lobby. I kept my hands folded neatly on the marble surface, my breathing slow and steady. "A private negotiation," Drew amended, his voice pitching higher as he registered my absolute lack of reaction. "He is looking at some properties, and he wanted my perspective on the branding angle. That is all it was. A drink and a strategy session. I swear to you, it is not as simple as you think." I did not argue with his hollow sentences. Arguments imply a belief that the other person might be telling the truth, or at least a desire to hear it. I had already bypassed the need for his truth. Instead, I observed. I let my gaze sweep over him with the clinical detachment of a forensic auditor examining a fraudulent ledger. I noted the slight dishevelment of his collar. As he stepped closer, gesturing with his hands to emphasize his lies, the faint, undeniable scent of aged bourbon drifted from his right cuff. My eyes tracked downward. He had carelessly dropped his leather briefcase onto the floor beside the counter. The flap was unbuckled, and jutting from the center compartment was a thick stack of paper. Even from 3 feet away, I recognized the distinctive heavy stock and the specific blue hue of the proprietary binders used exclusively by Wood's Civic Advisory. Finally, my gaze drifted back up to his suit jacket, thrown hastily over his left arm. Poking out of the breast pocket was the unmistakable white edge of a magnetic hotel keycard. "It is not as simple as I think," I repeated quietly, letting his own pathetic words hang in the air between us. "Exactly," he said, seizing on my response like a drowning man grabbing a frayed rope. "There are nuances here, Victoria. Business complexities you are not seeing." I tilted my head, locking my eyes with his. "Then let me ask you a very simple question. Drew, which one should I forgive first, the bed or the briefcase?" The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The color vanished from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the bright kitchen lights. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The air seemed to leave his lungs all at once. He had braced himself for the hysterical accusations of a betrayed wife. He was entirely unprepared for a chief executive officer who had already audited his treason. He realized, in that frozen second, that I had seen straight past the cheap affair and identified the corporate espionage buried underneath. "The briefcase," he stammered, his eyes darting panicked toward the leather bag on the floor. "Victoria, you do not understand. Landon is helping me. He is opening a door for a massive personal opportunity. Helping you," I stated flatly, dissecting the phrase. "Yes," Drew insisted, his voice gaining a desperate, defensive edge. "I need something of my own. I cannot spend the rest of my life playing the charming +1 at your galas. I cannot live forever in the shadow of your success. You build these massive empires. You control every variable, and I am just the branding guy you bring along. Landon respects my vision. He wants to back me." The more he spoke, the more the elegant veneer cracked, revealing the raw, ugly jealousy festering beneath. It was not just greed, it was profound cowardice. He lacked the discipline to build his own legacy, So he had decided to steal the blueprints of mine. I did not give him a scene. I left the birthday cake untouched and kept my hands still on the counter. Rage is a chaotic force that leaves you blind. What I felt was entirely different. It was cold, focused, and utterly precise. "Pick up your jacket," I commanded. My voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a steel blade. He blinked, confused by the lack of theatrics. "Pick it up," I repeated, "and gather your things. You are not sleeping in this house tonight. You will move your clothes and your personal items down to the small studio behind the garage. Victoria, be reasonable," he pleaded, taking a hesitant step toward me. "I am being profoundly reasonable," I replied, standing up slowly. "The studio has a bed and a heavy lock. It is where you used to entertain your private clients. It seems fitting. Go." He stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign of hesitation, any crack of emotional weakness he could exploit to regain control. He found a blank, impenetrable wall, defeated. His shoulders slumped. He turned and walked heavily down the hall toward the master bedroom to pack a bag. The second I heard the bedroom door click shut, I moved. I stepped over to his discarded leather briefcase and pulled the flap open wide. I slid my phone from my pocket and activated the camera. I did not touch the papers, careful not to disturb the exact order he had placed them in. I hovered the lens over the exposed documents. It was a devastating cache of internal data. There were preliminary cost estimates for the downtown waterfront revitalization, our highly confidential pricing models, and the upcoming negotiation schedules that only my executive board had clearance to view. I took 20 clear, perfectly framed photographs, ensuring every number, every client name, and every date was legible. I captured the proprietary watermarks on the margins. I captured the absolute proof of his theft. When Drew returned to the kitchen 15 minutes later, carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag, his briefcase sat exactly where he had left it. I was seated back at the island, my phone safely hidden in my pocket. He picked up his bag, cast one last, pathetic look at me, and walked out the back door toward the garage. That night, I walked straight into my home office, locked the heavy oak door, and sat down in the glow of my dual monitors. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the steady, mechanical rhythm of a court stenographer. I transferred the 20 photographs to a secure, encrypted offshore server. I immediately changed the passwords on our joint accounts. I logged the exact timestamps of his arrival, his departure to the studio, and the digital footprint of the credit card transaction at the hotel. I was not preparing for a messy marital dispute. I was not planning a tearful session with a couples counselor. As the clock ticked past midnight, officially ending my ruined birthday, I began compiling a comprehensive, lethal dossier. He wanted to play the role of a strategic mastermind. I was going to show him exactly what a real strategist looked like when her territory was breached. The war had started, and I intended to dismantle his life brick by stolen brick. I pulled into my designated parking spot at 5:30 the next morning. The sky over Nashville was still the color of bruised iron, bleeding slowly into a pale, unforgiving gray. The office was entirely silent, the air cool and humming with the faint mechanical breathing of the central ventilation system. I did not bother turning on the main overhead lights in the bullpen. I walked straight to my corner office, booted up my primary workstation, and picked up my desk phone. I dialed the direct cell number of Marcus, my director of information technology. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick and heavy with sleep, but the absolute, flat urgency in my tone cut straight through his fatigue. I instructed him to log on to his remote terminal immediately and run a comprehensive backdoor diagnostic on every external ping to our secure servers originating from my home internet protocol address over the past 6 months. Marcus was quiet for several long minutes, the rapid, percussive clacking of his mechanical keyboard filtering through the speakerphone. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, stripped of its usual casual demeanor. The preliminary results he read back to me sent a jolt of pure, freezing electricity down my spine. A legacy profile, tied to an old generation tablet that Drew ostensibly used only for reading architectural digests and streaming news, had bypassed our standard perimeter firewall, using a shadow copy of my secondary administrative credentials. The timestamps were glaring and undeniable. The logins consistently occurred between midnight and 3 in the morning. I had Marcus open a split screen and cross-reference those specific access dates with Drew's shared family calendar. The correlation was flawless. Every single late-night data breach happened precisely 24 to 48 hours before Drew traveled out of state for supposed brand consulting summits with Landon Pike. Marcus ran a deeper forensic trace. The deeper trace uncovered a devastating cache. Exactly 47 distinct files had been successfully downloaded or covertly forwarded to an encrypted external drive. These were not generic marketing brochures or public relations drafts. They had lifted my master client rosters. They had pulled the exact granular service pricing frameworks that gave us our competitive edge in blind submissions. They had ripped entire bidding schematics. Most devastatingly, they had taken my proprietary, highly sensitive digital notes regarding the upcoming downtown redevelopment initiative. That was a massive, multi-million-dollar municipal contract we were heavily favored to win, and the files contained the city council's psychological profiles and hidden budgetary pain points. I thanked Marcus, ordering him under strict confidentiality to keep the audit completely off the books for now, and hung up the phone. I pivoted my chair to the second monitor, logging directly into the administrative portal of our corporate financial institution. I pulled the master ledger for the joint platinum card. I had ignored the granular details of this account for years, trusting the broad, comfortable strokes of our life. Now, I scrutinized every single line item with the precision of a diamond cutter. The financial narrative was indisputable. Spanning the last 9 months, there were extensive, heavy charges for luxury boutique hotels, Atlanta in late spring, Louisville over the long holiday weekend, Dallas. Just 3 weeks ago, room service bills, premium bar tabs, private town car services, all neatly concealed under the guise of aggressive client acquisition and networking overhead. This shattered any lingering, pathetic defense of a spontaneous, one-night mistake. This was a calculated, sustained, and lavishly funded alternate reality. They had been living a parallel life, building a relationship on my dime. I executed a rapid, merciless series of digital severances. I immediately partitioned the joint spending accounts, locking his access completely and routing all existing capital into a secure holding trust under my sole legal name. I wiped his secondary permissions from the cloud network, effectively blinding all of his personal devices to my firm's ecosystem. I accessed the building security mainframe and voided his magnetic keycard, resetting the entry codes for the main lobby, the private elevator bank, and the executive wing. I did all of this with surgical, quiet precision. I explicitly mandated to the building manager and my chief of staff that these adjustments be framed merely as routine protocol upgrades mandated by our insurance carrier. I would not allow panic or gossip to ripple through my staff. Wood's Civic Advisory needed to project an aura of absolute, impenetrable stability. My employees' livelihoods depended on my ability to absorb this massive shockwave silently. Next, I opened the heavy steel filing cabinet behind my desk and pulled the physical master lease agreement for our residential property. I bypassed the standard clauses and flipped directly to the commercial addendums. Drew had been using the detached carriage house studio behind our property for his private client meetings, treating it as his autonomous masculine domain, his independent sanctuary. He was fundamentally wrong. The paperwork clearly dictated that the usage rights, the zoning permits, and the lease structure for that specific structure were heavily subsidized by and legally bound to the corporate entity of Wood's Civic Advisory. It was not his personal asset. It was a tax-advantaged operational extension of my firm. He was running his treasonous operations from a room I legally controlled. The stolen data and the logistical framework crystallized into a singular, damning picture. Drew was not merely sleeping with a ruthless investor. He was actively serving as the chief architect for Landon's new venture. They were using my exact data, my pricing, and my hard-earned market strategies to construct a shadow firm specifically designed to undercut and destroy Wood's Civic Advisory in the open market. He was feeding my empire to a wolf. At 8 in the morning, I picked up my phone and dialed the private line of Miriam Sloan. Miriam was a ghost in the corporate legal world, a phantom who specialized in high-stakes, scorched-earth commercial and marital disputes. She was infamous for stripping adversaries down to the studs, seizing assets, and forcing settlements without ever letting the ugly details leak to the press. She answered immediately, skipping any pleasantries. I gave her a precise, 2-minute executive summary of the stolen files and the hotel suites. She told me to clear my schedule and be at her office exactly at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Later that day, I sat in the driver's seat of my car, idling in the subterranean parking garage beneath Miriam's imposing glass-fronted building. The engine hummed quietly in the concrete cavern. The air conditioning blew a steady, cool stream against my face. I rested my forehead against the hand-stitched leather wrapping of the steering wheel. The pure, kinetic adrenaline of the morning's data sweep was slowly fading, leaving behind a heavy, metallic taste of absolute clarity in the back of my throat. I had spent 15 years believing I was married to a supportive partner who celebrated my drive and my intellect. But as I mentally reviewed the 47 stolen files and the 9 months of hotel receipts, the bitter, jagged truth settled permanently into my bones. My marriage had not been dismantled by a sudden surge of middle-aged lust or a crisis of faith. It had been systematically and intentionally destroyed by the quiet, toxic ambition of a man who simply could not stomach the reality that his wife was stronger, smarter, and infinitely more successful than he would ever be. His ego demanded a throne, and since he lacked the competence and the spine to build one himself, he had decided to burn mine down just to steal the ashes. Sitting in Miriam Sloan's austere, glass-walled conference room high above the city, the air felt thin, sharp, and entirely devoid of sentiment. Next to Miriam sat Elias Boone. Elias was a forensic accountant whose pale, unblinking eyes missed absolutely nothing. Spread across the massive expanse of the mahogany table was the digital harvest of my early morning audit. Elias had spent the last 3 hours meticulously cross-referencing the encrypted packet I had transferred to their secure server. He picked up a slender silver pen and pointed it at a dense, multicolored printed timeline. The overlap is not just suspicious. Victoria, it is statistically impossible to ignore, Elias stated, his voice a dry, methodical rasp that commanded total attention. He traced a solid red line connecting a specific, unauthorized data extraction to a flight manifest headed south. When we map his localized network access against his geographical movements, we have the unmistakable digital fingerprints of trade secret misappropriation. Furthermore, we are looking at unequivocal marital fraud and calculated, intentional interference with prospective business advantage. He left a trail a mile wide. Miriam leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, steepling her fingers beneath her chin. Her gaze was evaluating, cold, and entirely focused on the mechanics of destruction. The immediate problem we face in a standard dissolution, Miriam began, is untangling his legal presumption of shared marital assets, specifically regarding the overarching valuation of your firm. He will argue that his supportive role contributed to its growth. I allowed a small, frozen smile to touch the corners of my mouth. I reached into my structured leather tote bag and produced a thick, blue-backed legal document. I slid it smoothly across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of Miriam. 5 years ago, I said, my voice perfectly steady in the quiet room, when I finalized the purchase of the historic townhouse that currently serves as our corporate headquarters, I required Drew to sign a comprehensive post-nuptial agreement. I remembered that specific evening with crystalline clarity. We had been standing in our kitchen, drinking a robust red wine. I had presented the thick stack of paper as a non-negotiable structural condition for integrating massive new real estate assets into our existing portfolio. Drew had laughed out loud. He swirled the wine in his glass, openly mocking me for being excessively defensive. He had called it a sad symptom of my underlying control issues, a barrier to true intimacy. Then, Fueled by his own arrogance and an impatient desire to move on to his dinner reservations, he had impatiently flipped straight to the signature block on the very last page. He signed his name with a dramatic flourish without reading a single operational clause. He never realized that the document contained ironclad, extremely punitive stipulations regarding strict corporate confidentiality, the preservation of my sole business ownership, and severe, immediate financial consequences should either party attempt to leverage the marriage for unilateral commercial profit. Miriam opened the file. Her eyes darted back and forth as she scanned the dense legal language. A rare, genuinely predatory smile spread across her face. Victoria, this is airtight. It is not just a contract. It is a barrier he is not getting through. But Elias was not finished. He tapped a sequence of keys on his laptop, projecting a recovered document onto the large flat screen mounted on the far wall. While you were driving over here, I dug much deeper into the hidden partition on the hard drive, Elias explained, adjusting his glasses. I bypassed his basic deletion protocols. Look at this. It was a drafted, highly detailed term sheet. The bold header across the top read, Pike Callahan Urban Strategies. The breath left my lungs in a slow, highly controlled exhale. I read the screen. The proposed corporate structure, the defined service verticals, the initial target market demographic, the exact margin projections. It was a precise carbon copy of Wood Civic Advisory. Drew was listed explicitly as the founding managing partner. Landon Pike was designated as the primary capital provider and silent majority shareholder. They were actively building a parasitic clone using my stolen architectural blueprints. It gets substantially worse, Elias warned, pulling up a secondary window containing a recovered email thread. I read Drew's exact words glowing on the screen. He was writing directly to Landon. In the message, he explicitly promised that within 8 to 10 months, he could leverage my growing emotional exhaustion and the internal operational stress of the firm to smoothly steer me into a forced merger. He detailed a vicious strategy to back me into a corner, where I would either be forced to sell a controlling stake to Landon for absolute pennies on the dollar, or I would have to watch Wood Civic Advisory bleed to death as our major, multi-million-dollar municipal bids were systematically underbid using the stolen pricing models he had provided. He was not simply walking away from a 15-year marriage. He was actively, meticulously plotting to slaughter my life's work and sell the carcass to my biggest rival. As I stared unblinking at the screen, a wave of profound, acidic clarity washed over my entire body. I began to silently list out the physical realities of Drew's daily, luxurious existence. The premium sport utility vehicle he drove every day was leased exclusively through my corporate fleet account. His exorbitant monthly country club dues were categorized directly as my firm's business development expenses. The very studio he was currently sleeping in, his supposed masculine sanctuary, was heavily subsidized by my corporate balance sheet. His entire aura of success, his bespoke suits, his effortless networking lunches, his polished public image, all of it was funded, sustained, and protected by the exact system he was currently trying to sabotage. He was a parasite attempting to consume the host while arrogantly demanding continued shelter inside its walls. Miriam tapped her silver pen sharply against the table, bringing my focus back to the immediate present. Here is the playbook moving forward, she announced, her tone shifting seamlessly into pure tactical command. We absolutely do not leak a single word of this to the press. We do not engage in any form of petty social media warfare. You will not badmouth him to your mutual acquaintances or industry partners. We do not play emotional games. Emotion is a severe tactical vulnerability. I nodded once, signaling my absolute agreement. Instead, Miriam continued, leaning forward, we strike structurally and invisibly. We will issue formal spoliation letters to both Drew and Landon by 5 o'clock today, legally mandating the immediate preservation of all digital and physical evidence. If they destroy or alter anything after receiving that letter, the court will treat it as deliberate spoliation. Simultaneously, we will file ex parte motions with the judge to freeze any and all capital accounts linked to his name. We will let the default penalty clauses in your postnuptial agreement silently, methodically tighten the noose around his neck. I have one absolute, non-negotiable condition, I interjected, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate or compromise. Every single legal or financial action we take must shield my employees first. I have 42 dedicated people on my payroll who rely entirely on me to pay their mortgages, fund their retirements, and feed their children. I will not allow a single assistant, analyst, or senior director to lose $1 of their salary or fear for their job security simply because my husband decided to turn our marriage bed into a clandestine corporate boardroom. Miriam looked at me for a long moment, her expression reflecting deep, unspoken professional respect. She slowly closed the blue-backed folder and rested her hands flat on the polished mahogany table. "Understood," Miriam said quietly, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. She looked over at Elias, then brought her piercing gaze back to me. "Make no mistake about what we are handling here. Victoria, this is no longer a divorce proceeding. This is a systemic heist that just happens to be occurring inside a marriage. The first ripples of a sinking ship always reach the shore before the wreckage does. In the insular, highly connected world of southern urban development, secrets are a currency traded in hushed tones over expensive lunches. But Landon Pike possessed an ego that demanded an audience. By late Thursday afternoon, he posted a highly stylized, intentionally vague update on his professional networking profile. He boasted about a forthcoming venture, one he claimed was preparing to redefine the market architecture of the region. He did not explicitly name his new partner, but he tagged 2 prominent zoning consultants and a very specific commercial architect. My daughter, Wren, sitting in her graduate studio in Boston, saw the post. She recognized the architect immediately as one of my firm's frequent external contractors. 30 minutes later, my son, Beck, received a text message from a classmate currently interning at a civil engineering firm in Knoxville. The text asked a simple, devastating question. "Is it true your dad is jumping ship to run a new shop with Landon Pike?" The insulated walls I had built around my family were cracking. I knew I had a window of perhaps 2 hours before my children were fed a severely distorted, sanitized version of their father's treason. I cleared my schedule, locked the heavy oak door of my office, and picked up my phone. I called Wren first. When she answered, the background noise of her design studio was loud, but her voice was tight and cautious. I did not soften the blow with maternal platitudes. I delivered the facts with the same steady, unflinching rhythm I used in corporate boardrooms. I told her that her father had violated the boundaries of our marriage. I told her he had covertly transferred sensitive internal data from my firm to a direct competitor. I informed her that I was already executing a comprehensive legal response. "I am not asking you to take a side," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I am simply giving you the absolute truth so that you are not humiliated or manipulated by the fictions other people will try to sell you." Wren's breathing hitched over the line. Her voice shook, trembling with a sudden, violent mixture of grief and disbelief. But beneath the tremor, her mind was razor-sharp. She did not ask if we could go to counseling. She did not ask if it was a misunderstanding. She absorbed the blast radius and told me she loved me. I dialed Beck next. My son is a man of few words, an engineering student whose mind naturally organizes chaos into structural logic. I repeated the exact same sequence of facts to him. When I finished, the line went entirely dead for what felt like a full 60 seconds. I did not fill the silence. I let him process the destruction of his father's image. When Beck finally spoke, his voice was chillingly calm, carrying an uncanny echo of my own analytical detachment. "What is he planning to take from you besides your trust?" I closed my eyes, pressing 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose. In the midst of the darkest week of my life, my 20-year-old son had instantly identified the core operational threat. He understood, instinctively, that his father was not a man who walked away empty-handed. The emotional fallout did not remain confined to my children. The following morning, my office phone rang. The caller identification displayed the landline of Drew's mother. I answered out of a rigid sense of Southern obligation. For 10 agonizing minutes, she wept and pleaded. She begged me to keep the situation quiet, to handle things privately to preserve the family honor. She suggested that men sometimes lose their way, and that a strong wife knows how to guide them back into the fold. I let her finish her desperate, antiquated monologue. Then, I delivered my response in a tone entirely stripped of warmth. Family honor requires a family that honors its agreements, I stated. My obligation to privacy permanently expired the exact second your son stepped into that hotel suite with a man who was actively carrying my company's proprietary data in his head. Do not call this office again. I placed the receiver back on its cradle. The most profound shock of the week, however, did not come from an enemy, but from an entirely unexpected ally. Later that afternoon, a courier delivered a sealed manila envelope to my desk marked strictly confidential. Inside was a single, photocopied document and a handwritten note from Mara Callahan, Drew's older sister. Mara worked as a senior director at a massive title and property records agency across town. We had always maintained a cordial, if slightly distant, relationship. The note was brief. You need to see this. Protect yourself. I unfolded the document. It was a formal preliminary inquiry for a secondary commercial mortgage. The applicant name was Drew Callahan. The proposed collateral listed on the form was the exact street address of my historic townhouse, the very building that housed Wood Civic Advisory. The date on the inquiry was exactly 4 weeks prior. My blood ran ice cold. The revelation shifted the entire landscape of his betrayal. Drew had not merely been satisfied with stealing my digital blueprints and plotting a hostile market takeover with Landon. He had actively probed the legal boundaries of our assets, exploring a method to leverage my physical property, the literal roof over my employees' heads, to quietly generate the seed capital for his own parasitic venture. He had intended to use my house to fund my execution. That weekend, Wren bypassed my instructions to stay out of the crossfire and boarded a flight from Boston to Nashville. She did not come to the townhouse. She arranged to meet her father at a neutral coffee shop on the edge of the city. I did not try to stop her. She was a grown woman, and she needed to look the man in the eye to reconcile the father she knew with the saboteur I had exposed. She returned to my house 2 hours later. She walked into the kitchen, dropped her travel bag onto the floor, and sat heavily on a bar stool. Her eyes were red, but her posture was rigid with an angry, permanent resolve. She recounted the meeting in short, clipped sentences. Drew had arrived looking carefully disheveled, immediately launching into a well-rehearsed narrative of profound loneliness. He had attempted to paint himself as a suffocated artist, a man experiencing a severe midlife crisis who had simply sought connection and professional validation because I was too consumed by my empire to notice him fading away. He weaponized his own insecurity, hoping his daughter would offer him the absolution his wife had denied. I stood up, Wren told me, her voice hardening. I told him that loneliness is a reason to get a therapist, not a reason to steal a pricing model. He is still playing the victim. He actually expects us to feel sorry for him because he got caught trying to ruin you. I walked around the kitchen island and placed my hands on my daughter's shoulders. I looked at her, and I thought of Beck, hundreds of miles away, quietly asking the most critical, protective question of all. The pain in my chest was real, a dull, throbbing ache for the fractured family portrait we used to project. But as I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, the overwhelming sensation was not loss. It was an immense, terrifying pride. I had lost a husband who had turned into a parasite, but I saw with absolute clarity the most valuable asset I had successfully secured. I had not preserved a beautiful marriage, but I had raised 2 incredibly strong, fiercely intelligent children. They were looking at the wreckage of their family, and instead of being manipulated by late, calculated tears, they were demanding accountability. They were untouchable, and so was I. I did not wait for the blast radius to reach my clients naturally. In my industry, Whoever controls the initial flow of information controls the survival of the firm. On Monday morning, precisely at 8 o'clock, I initiated a preemptive, highly calculated strike. I drafted strictly confidential, individually tailored memorandums to my 3 most critical strategic partners and the executive directors of 2 major urban development boards currently reviewing our active proposals. I did not use the word theft. I used the phrase unauthorized internal data exfiltration. I informed them, clearly and devoid of any emotional filler, that my firm had detected a potential digital breach originating from a compromised legacy device. I stated that I was voluntarily initiating a comprehensive third-party forensic review of all our network architecture to ensure their continued operational security. The silence that followed the transmission of those messages was heavy. Conventional corporate crisis management dictates absolute denial until definitive proof is forced into the light. I chose radical, uncomfortable transparency. By noon, my private line rang. It was the chairman of the largest municipal board. Instead of pulling their massive contract, he thanked me for my absolute candor. He told me that in his 30 years of city planning, he had never seen a managing partner step directly in front of a bullet they could have easily swept under the rug. My willingness to risk my firm's immediate optics solidified their trust in my leadership. I owned the narrative because I wrote the first draft of the disaster. The collateral damage of their sloppiness surfaced less than 48 hours later. A local oversight committee responsible for a massive municipal redevelopment tranche quietly halted their review process. They had received a blind submission from Landon's newly minted shell corporation. A sharp-eyed compliance officer on the board noticed a glaring, undeniable anomaly. Entire paragraphs outlining the community impact mitigation strategy were functionally identical to a proprietary presentation my firm had drafted but never publicly released. Marcus, my director of information technology, did not just find the copied text. He ripped the digital skeleton out of the stolen files. He extracted the raw metadata embedded deep within Landon's submitted proposal. It was a massacre of arrogance. The document properties still carried the internal machine registry name of my downtown office. The author identification tag belonged exclusively to my senior research analyst. Deep in the revision history, Marcus even recovered a margin note left by my executive assistant regarding a minor formatting error. Drew and his new financial backer were so incredibly eager to rush their counterfeit operation to market that they had fundamentally failed to scrub the digital footprint of my company from the very documents they stole. They thought I would be too blinded by marital grief to look at the source code. With the structural integrity of their new venture rapidly fracturing, I turned my attention back to the domestic ledger. I cut off his financial access without a single warning. I contacted the corporate leasing agency and ordered the immediate repossession of the luxury sport utility vehicle Drew drove every single day. I called the membership director of his exclusive country club and formally revoked his access, citing an immediate and permanent cessation of all corporate sponsorship. I officially terminated the internal lease on the Carriage House studio, instructing a private security contractor to change the heavy iron locks and box up his meticulously curated furniture. I severed every single vague, recurring financial transfer he had historically classified as family administrative arrangements. His response was utterly predictable and entirely pathetic. He did not hire a vicious litigator to fight me. He sent flowers. Massive, ostentatious arrangements of white lilies and orchids began arriving at the reception desk of my office. My voicemail filled with his smooth, practiced baritone. He left long, agonizingly crafted apologies that spoke endlessly of lost connection, of the tragic erosion of our shared history, and of his profound personal regret. Not once in those suffocating monologues did he mention the stolen data. He never acknowledged the bid manipulation or the secret hotel suites. His apologies were beautifully constructed stage plays designed to mask the absolute fact that he was only bleeding because I had turned off the tap. He was mourning his suspended privileges, not the death of his integrity. By Thursday evening, the mounting pressure finally flushed Landon out of the shadows. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the final draft of Miriam's spoliation order, when my private cell line vibrated. The caller identification displayed an unlisted number. I answered, keeping my breathing perfectly even. "Victoria," Landon began, his voice exuding the calm, frictionless confidence of a man entirely accustomed to buying his way out of burning buildings. "I think we need to have a rational conversation before this situation spirals into an unnecessary spectacle. Emotions are clearly running high, but at the end of the day, we are both pragmatists. There is a number that can make this entire misunderstanding go away. Let me compensate you for your trouble, and we can all move forward quietly." I wasted no breath arguing. I ended the call in the middle of his sentence. I immediately typed a brief email to Miriam, instructing her to log the exact time and duration of the incoming call. It was the ultimate tell. Men like Landon only offer settlements when they realize the trap they confidently walked into is made of forged steel, not fragile glass. He was terrified. As I packed my briefcase and turned off the overhead lights in my office, a profound sense of operational superiority settled over me. I understood the fatal flaw in their entire grand design. Drew and his wealthy backer had operated under a catastrophic demographic assumption. They were entirely accustomed to navigating a world where women who suffer profound betrayal react predictably. They expected me to scream, to break down, to demand agonizing explanations in the middle of the night, or to desperately cling to the decaying framework of my marriage. They had built their entire timeline assuming my emotional collapse would provide them the perfect, chaotic cover to execute their theft. They were profoundly, fatally unprepared for the specific caliber of woman they had decided to cross. They did not anticipate a wife who treats infidelity as a critical breach of contract. They did not plan for a woman who bypasses the tiers, immediately submits redundant server backups, locks every financial portal, and simply steps back to let the brutal, grinding machinery of the law do the rest of the talking. They thought they were playing a game of broken hearts. I was dismantling a hostile corporate takeover, breaking every single screw of their betrayal machine with absolute, unyielding precision. Elias Boone did not look up from his workstation when I entered the secure conference room. He simply pushed a thick, leather-bound binder across the table. We had originally assumed the financial damage was limited to corporate sabotage and stolen client rosters. We were fundamentally wrong. The narrative was twisting, plunging into a depth of criminality that took my breath away. Elias had spent 72 uninterrupted hours mapping a chaotic web of shell companies and offshore wire transfers. He found the ultimate objective. They were not just stealing my blueprints to build a competing agency. They were executing a massive, preemptive land grab. Elias traced a series of pending property acquisitions linked directly to Landon. The exact geographic coordinates of these dilapidated warehouses and empty lots matched perfectly with the targeted revitalization zones I was actively consulting on for the city council. My husband had taken my highly sensitive, unreleased data regarding the upcoming municipal rezoning and reappraisal timelines and handed it to Landon so they could buy the land for pennies before the city publicly announced the massive redevelopment project. It was not just marital treason, it was a textbook execution of insider trading within the urban development sector. They were planning to front-run the market using the confidential knowledge I had spent years cultivating. The puzzle became horrifyingly complete when another encrypted message arrived from Mara. She was taking an incredible professional risk, but her moral compass was proving stronger than blood. She forwarded a scanned dossier containing a series of quiet, off-market purchasing options executed by a newly incorporated holding group. The holding group was a thinly veiled front for Landon. I looked at the dates the non-refundable earnest money had been wired into escrow. The transactions occurred precisely during the exact 14-day window when my husband had been bypassing my network firewalls in the middle of the night. Every time he downloaded a restricted file outlining a proposed transit hub or a commercial tax incentive, a corresponding piece of dirt was bought the very next morning. The weight of his actions finally backed him into a corner. Late that evening, he appeared at the edge of the driveway as I was stepping out of my vehicle. The smooth, polished exterior was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic, volatile energy of a trapped animal. For the first time since this nightmare began, he lost his temper. He shouted, his voice echoing against the brick exterior of the house. He accused me of being a machine, a woman utterly devoid of human warmth. He tried to weaponize my composure, screaming that my ability to remain calm while dismantling his life proved I had never truly loved him. He desperately needed my stoicism to be the villain of the story, a retroactive justification for his profound weakness. I stood perfectly still, holding my briefcase, letting the cool night air absorb his pathetic rage. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. I simply looked at the man I had shared a bed with for a decade and a half, and I stripped away the last remaining shred of his dignity. "Spreadsheets do not betray anyone," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "People do—" The words struck him like physical blows. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw going slack. In that fleeting second, he stared into my eyes and finally understood the catastrophic magnitude of his error. He realized he was no longer negotiating with a wounded wife. He was standing in the path of a very deliberate, unstoppable force, a version of me that had completely eradicated any possibility of an honorable exit or a quiet settlement. I walked past him, locked the front door, and immediately drafted an emergency directive to Miriam. The legal machinery shifted into its highest gear. Miriam spent the night preparing a comprehensive application for an emergency ex parte injunction to freeze every single real estate transaction tied to their holding companies. But her true genius lay in the parallel maneuver. She compiled a dense package of our stolen data metrics and routed it through a quiet compliance channel inside the city contracting process. It was a brilliant tactical phantom. The mere presence of this dossier in the bureaucratic pipeline would instantly trigger automatic administrative red flags, permanently barricading Landon from ever securing a legitimate city contract using my purloined strategies. We were poisoning the well they were trying to drink from. Before the sun came up, I made 2 final phone calls. I spoke to Wren and then to Beck. The scandal was inevitably going to breach the public domain, and I needed to secure my family's foundation. I listened to their tired, anxious voices, and I gave them the absolute assurance they needed. I explained that their university tuition, their living stipends, and their long-term trust funds were utterly impenetrable. 7 years ago, I had quietly established an aggressive series of irrevocable trusts, legally severing their future wealth from our joint marital assets. My husband had always assumed he possessed unlimited access to the entire kingdom. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he fundamentally failed to comprehend the complex financial architecture I had built right underneath his feet. He could not touch a single dime of his children's future. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, the hammer fell. Process servers coordinated a simultaneous strike. One walked into the crowded lobby of Landon's opulent downtown headquarters, bypassing the frantic receptionist to hand him a thick manila envelope. The other server intercepted my husband as he was attempting to purchase coffee at a cafe 2 blocks from his rented studio. They were served with identical, ironclad letters demanding the immediate and absolute preservation of all evidence. For the first time, the illusion of their brilliant, lucrative conspiracy evaporated. As they each stared at the severe legal warnings detailing severe sanctions for destroying evidence, the crushing reality of their situation finally set in. They had thought they were being exceptionally clever. They believed they were initiating the first stages of a glorious, highly profitable empire. Instead, as the ink on those legal demands dried, the 2 men suddenly understood that their meetings in that suite were never the beginning of a new future. They had simply been leaving their fingerprints all over a brightly lit crime scene. When the threat of federal litigation shifts from a theoretical risk to a certified letter sitting on a mahogany desk, alliances forged in stolen hotel suites disintegrate with spectacular speed. Landon Pike was, above all things, an apex predator who survived by immediately severing infected limbs. Within 48 hours of receiving Miriam's spoliation demand, the narrative out of Landon's camp shifted violently. Through back-channel whispers and calculated leaks in the development community, Landon began to paint my husband as an overly emotional, unstable liability. Landon casually suggested to mutual contacts that Drew had simply misunderstood the nature of their relationship, framing the entire affair as a casual mentorship that a desperate, clinging man had pathetically misinterpreted as a binding business partnership. Drew found himself entirely marooned. I had already stripped him of his corporate armor. He had no access to the carriage house studio. The luxury sport utility vehicle was sitting securely in a dealership lot, and his secondary expense accounts were frozen solid. But the truly agonizing blow for him was the sudden, deafening silence from his supposed savior. The man who had shared his bed and promised him a glittering empire was no longer returning his calls. Texts that used to be answered in seconds now sat unread for days on end. Drew was learning the hard way that a man willing to help you steal from your wife will not hesitate to leave you bleeding on the side of the road when the sirens approach. Just as the opposition began to cannibalize itself, a ghost walked into the center of our war room. I received an encrypted message from my lawyer instructing me to come downtown immediately through the private service elevator. When I walked into the glass conference room, a woman draped in expensive neutral cashmere was sitting perfectly still across from Miriam. It was Eleanor Pike, Landon's estranged wife. Eleanor was not there on a noble crusade for sisterhood or moral justice. She was driven by something far more reliable and dangerous: pure, unadulterated financial self-interest. She was in the middle of her own vicious divorce proceedings, and through her own forensic digging, she had discovered that Landon was actively hiding a complex network of newly formed shell companies and pending real estate acquisitions from their joint asset disclosures. Her pragmatism made her the most lethal witness imaginable. Eleanor slid a thick beige folder across the polished table. The contents were a gold mine. It contained physical credit card folios from luxury resorts, detailed private flight logs, and, most devastatingly, a printed stack of direct email correspondence between Landon and my husband. Miriam handed me the top sheet. I read the highlighted text, written directly from Drew's personal account. It read, "Victoria will never see the real capitalization table until everything closes." That single sentence became the centerpiece of our legal strategy. It completely obliterated any lingering, pathetic defense that my husband had acted in a brief moment of panic or midlife confusion. It proved, in undeniable black and white ink, that he was a willing, active architect in a multi-phased conspiracy. He had plotted the financial manipulation, the physical betrayal, and the strategic corporate theft with absolute, chilling clarity. By Tuesday evening, the crushing weight of his isolation broke him. My phone buzzed, displaying a burner number, but I knew exactly who it was. I answered without saying a word. Drew's voice came through the speaker, breathless, frantic, and entirely stripped of all its polished arrogance. For the first time in his life, he was truly begging. He pleaded with me to sign a sworn affidavit stating that the transfer of my firm's proprietary data was merely a technical glitch, an innocent accident where files were mistakenly synced across our shared family network devices. He desperately needed me to give him an alibi to avoid the impending federal charges and to salvage his rapidly disintegrating arrangement with Landon. I did not yell. I did not express a single ounce of anger. I offered him a perfectly calm, entirely lethal counterproposal. "If you want me to even consider any form of leniency," I stated evenly, "you will come to my lawyer's office tomorrow morning. You will sit down and sign a legally binding, exhaustive inventory detailing every single stolen email, every compromised device, every clandestine meeting you attended, and every single dollar of projected profit you and Landon plan to generate from my data." A suffocating silence stretched across the line. He knew he could never sign it. Doing so would be signing his own financial and professional death warrant. Without another word, I disconnected the call. He did not dare call back. The shockwaves continued to settle over my family, testing the structural integrity of the children I had raised. Wren, acting with the decisive ruthlessness she undoubtedly inherited from me, formally blocked her father on every single communication platform. She completely severed the cord, refusing to be a pawn in his apology tour. Later that night, As I sat alone in my dark kitchen, my phone lit up with a single text message from Beck. It read, "Mom does not need me loud. She needs me steady." I stared at the glowing letters on the screen. For the very first time since the night of my ruined birthday, the burning, physical sting of tears rushed to the back of my eyes. My chest heaved once, a sharp intake of breath as the profound love and fierce loyalty of my son collided with the wreckage of my marriage. But I forced my jaw shut. I swallowed the grief down. I refused to let the tears fall, not even in the privacy of my own empty house. Crying was a luxury I could not afford until the war was won. By the end of the week, the final battlefield was officially drawn. Miriam successfully secured a confirmed date for the emergency injunction hearing in Superior Court. Simultaneously, the Municipal Oversight Committee scheduled their formal review of the compromised bidding contracts. Both events were slated to occur in exactly 7 days. The timeline was rapidly compressing, forcing all the scattered, chaotic pieces of this disaster into one brutal, unavoidable collision point. Yet, incredibly, through the whisper network of mutual acquaintances, I learned that my husband was still clinging to a bizarre, delusional hope. He honestly believed that as the clock ran out, I would flinch. He thought that when faced with the stark reality of dragging our private lives into a highly public courtroom, I would choose to settle quietly to protect my social standing and my corporate image. He still thought my pride was my greatest weakness. He remained entirely blind to the fact that my pride was the very weapon that was going to bury him. The entire urban development ecosystem of Nashville was vibrating with rumors. A low, constant hum of speculation echoed through the corridors of City Hall and the private dining rooms of the elite country clubs. I did not issue a single press release. I did not hire a crisis management firm to spin a narrative. Every morning at precisely 6:30, I walked through the glass doors of my firm. I held my weekly staff meetings. I reviewed structural blueprints, and I signed off on quarterly payroll. I operated with a terrifying, absolute normalcy. My silence became a weapon. In a city where powerful people usually scream to defend their reputations, my complete refusal to engage created a vacuum that terrified my adversaries far more than any vocalized threat. Drew, however, fundamentally misread the silence. Trapped in his own echo chamber, he convinced himself that my lack of public outrage was a symptom of exhaustion. He clung to the desperate, pathetic belief that when the clock finally ran out, I would flinch. He told his inner circle that I would inevitably choose a quiet, sealed settlement because I was simply too proud to endure a public spectacle that intertwined a scandalous sexual affair with corporate espionage and a municipal bidding war. He thought he knew the limits of my endurance. The evening before the emergency review board convened, the doorbell of my townhouse rang. I stood in the foyer and watched through the security monitor as Drew shifted his weight on the front porch. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit. Tied immaculately around his neck was a deep sapphire blue silk tie. I had purchased that exact tie for him in Milan for his 42nd birthday. He wore it like a talisman, a desperate, transparent psychological ploy, as if a woven piece of fabric could miraculously bear the weight of a collapsed foundation. I opened the door but left the heavy security chain engaged, offering him a vertical slice of my hardened expression. "Please," he said, his voice dropping into a practiced, raspy register of vulnerability. "Just 5 minutes." I did not unlatch the chain, but I stepped back an inch, giving him the floor. He leaned against the heavy wood frame. "When I was with Landon," he began, his eyes pleading, "I finally felt like I was being seen as an independent force. I was not just the husband of the great Victoria Woods. I had my own gravity. I just wanted something that was entirely mine." It was a rehearsed, poetic attempt to elevate his betrayal into a tragic quest for self-actualization, but the performance could not hold. Within 30 seconds, the fragile mask of the tortured artist shattered, revealing the terrified coward underneath. "Do not destroy me tomorrow," he begged, the polished veneer completely gone. "I will lose my license. I will lose everything. Please, do not do this to me." I looked at his panicked face, and the final piece of my own internal puzzle snapped perfectly into place. I finally understood the exact anatomy of our ruin. My marriage had not died on the 14th floor of a luxury hotel. It did not end when he took another man into his bed. It died the very second he made the conscious, calculated decision to leverage my love, my home, and my absolute trust as collateral to finance his own fragile ego. He had pawned our life together just to feel tall. I closed the door silently in his face and walked back to my home office. My secure line rang at exactly 9 o'clock. It was Miriam. Her voice crackled with the cold, electric energy of an impending execution. "The strategy for tomorrow is absolute discipline," she instructed. "We do not interrupt. We let their counsel control the floor. We allow them to confidently deny every single allegation on the official municipal record. Once they have firmly locked themselves into a perjury trap, we dismantle them layer by deliberate layer." She outlined the sequence of disclosures. We would start with the unauthorized server access logs, then drop the encrypted emails. Next, we would expose the shell companies and the corresponding land assets, followed by the hotel invoices. Finally, we would introduce the sworn affidavit from Eleanor Pike. It was a flawless, inescapable progression. Earlier that week, a highly respected veteran member of the Municipal Planning Council had requested a private, off-the-record coffee with me. He was a man who preferred smooth transitions and quiet exits. He gently suggested that I consider a soft settlement, warning me that a nuclear fallout could potentially splatter mud on my own pristine firm. I did not argue. I simply opened my leather portfolio and slid a single, redacted page of the data breach report across the table. He read the numbers, the matched timestamps, and the stolen pricing tiers. The color drained from his face. He pushed the paper back to me, cleared his throat, and stated clearly that he would personally motion for a special, immediate vote to permanently revoke the bidding status of Landon's consortium. The gentle peacemaker had instantly become an executioner. That night, the front door of the townhouse clicked open. Wren walked into the hallway, having booked a last-minute commercial flight from Boston. She dropped her canvas bag and pulled me into a fierce, silent embrace. I noticed a glint of gold on her wrist. She was wearing my grandmother's vintage watch, a silent, powerful testament to the unbreakable lineage of the women in our family. Beck could not fly down due to a brutal schedule of engineering midterms, but he sent a secure link to a private video server, ensuring he would be watching the live feed of the public hearing from his dorm room. They did not shout. They did not offer hollow words of comfort, but as I prepared my briefcase for the morning, their steadfast presence wrapped around me like armor. I knew with absolute certainty that I was not walking into that boardroom alone. The municipal review chamber was a cavernous room paneled in dark walnut, packed to the absolute fire capacity with council members, legal aides, and silent industry observers. The air was thick and heavy. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, Landon's lead defense attorney stood at the podium. He was a man who radiated expensive, unearned confidence. He looked directly at the center camera and stated, with perfect, unwavering arrogance, that his client's newly formed venture had never engaged in any form of corporate espionage, and that there was absolutely no misuse of material or proprietary data. The room held its collective breath. Miriam did not object. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood up, looked the defense attorney dead in the eye, and slid a heavy, physically sealed hard drive straight across the center of the polished mahogany table. The silence in the municipal review chamber was absolute as the technician connected the sealed hard drive to the primary display system. Miriam did not deliver a passionate, theatrical opening statement. She simply let the forensic data speak. The digital logs materialized first on the massive projection wall, showing the exact timestamps when Drew's old tablet bypassed my home network security. Then came the emails, displayed in crisp, undeniable black text. The correspondence detailed explicit promises to divide the future profits derived directly from my stolen zoning data. Next, Elias's metadata overlay illuminated the screen, presenting a visual massacre of their conspiracy. The exact times of every single data hemorrhage matched perfectly, down to the very minute, with the keycard swipes for Suite 1408 at the Calder Hotel. That luxurious room was never a sanctuary for a misguided romance. It was the designated epicenter of their corporate espionage. We did not stop there. The sworn testimony of Eleanor Pike, combined with the shell company ledgers and the preliminary property inquiries provided by Mara, painted a devastating, inescapable mural of premeditated fraud. It proved unequivocally that Landon and my husband had spent months meticulously planning to gut my project proposals, artificially weaken my firm's market position, and personally profit by purchasing the surrounding real estate right before the public municipal announcements. The reaction in the room was instantaneous and lethal. The chairman of the council did not even wait to call for a formal recess. He struck his wooden gavel and immediately disqualified Landon's consortium from the entire city bidding process. The contagion of failure spread rapidly. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, 2 of Landon's cornerstone clients formally froze all negotiations with his new entity. At 4:15, his primary capital partner officially withdrew their entire funding commitment. His new empire crumbled to dust before a single brick was ever laid. The corporate destruction was followed immediately by the domestic reckoning. The post-nuptial agreement performed exactly as I had designed it 5 years prior. Drew lost everything he had arrogantly assumed was his permanent birthright. The Carriage House studio was legally reclaimed by my firm. His desperate, 11th-hour attempts to wedge himself into the capitalization table of Wood Civic Advisory were completely obliterated by the severe breach of contract clauses. He could not touch the historic townhouse, nor could he access a single cent of the diverse portfolio of assets I had meticulously placed into protective legal trusts long before he ever decided to burn our marriage down. When we finally sat across from each other at the long mahogany table during the binding divorce mediation, he looked completely hollowed out. The polished, charismatic branding executive was gone, replaced by a man who had finally realized the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. I could have completely crushed him. I possessed the legal and financial leverage to leave him drowning in decades of debt and federal litigation. But I chose a different path, not out of mercy or lingering affection, but out of a profound desire for absolute hygiene. I slid a clean, definitive settlement across the table. It offered him a very modest financial runway, his personal belongings, and the freedom to walk away and attempt to rebuild his shattered life. In exchange, I demanded 2 non-negotiable terms. First, a signed, legally binding admission of his theft to insulate my firm from any future liability. Second, the complete reimbursement of every single dollar I had spent on legal and forensic accounting fees. I did not want a dramatic performance or a tearful apology. I wanted him excised from my life like a benign tumor. He picked up the heavy brass pen and signed his name. He had no other choice. He had personally poured gasoline on every other available exit. The substantial financial reimbursement did not sit idle in my accounts. I immediately repurposed it. I distributed a generous round of retention bonuses to the loyal team at Wood Civic Advisory, the brilliant people who had stood by me and weathered the brutal storm without ever asking questions. I allocated the remainder to the career trusts I had established for Wren and Beck. I was not attempting to buy their peace or compensate for their pain. I was executing a fundamental principle of my profession. When a structure takes damage, you do not just patch the cracks and hope it holds. You use the remaining debris to pour a stronger, deeper foundation. Exactly 1 year later, on the evening of my 42nd birthday, I walked back onto the rooftop terrace of the Ash Room. I had booked the exact same corner table. The Nashville skyline glittered below us, a sprawling, beautiful grid of amber and silver light. But this time, the narrative belonged entirely to me. There was no single, lonely candle sitting on the table. There were no frantic text messages arriving at 8 o'clock. There was no pathetic lie vibrating on my phone screen, and absolutely no part of me was watching the glass elevator doors, waiting for a man who was never going to show up. I sat comfortably between Wren and Beck. We ate a slow, magnificent dinner. We drank an excellent vintage, shared quiet stories about their upcoming university projects, and laughed far more than I ever thought possible 12 months ago. I did not raise my crystal glass to offer a grand theatrical speech about my victory. I did not mention Drew's name or revel in his professional exile. True power does not require a captivated audience, and real survival does not need to boast. I simply sat there, breathing the cool evening air, anchored by the clean, undeniable truth. I had not just saved my corporate empire, I had kept my own soul intact. As the evening wound down, a polite waiter approached our table with a warm, professional smile. He gestured gently to the empty fourth chair. "Excuse me, ma'am," he asked softly. "Should I keep this setting open? Are we waiting for anyone else to arrive?" I looked at my brilliant daughter and my steady, observant son. I offered the waiter a genuine, radiant smile. "No," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and completely whole. "The people I am waiting for are already here. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. And I invite you to subscribe to the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.